I'm Paul Brewer. I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I'm a retired millwright. And I'm a United States Marine.
To understand the story that we have today, we have to go back in time, much further than when Paul's story began. Understanding the cause and effect theory actually does exist and runs fluidly through time and space just as surely as water flows through a babbling stream. Carving into the banks of time, changing the flow of events that dictate the outcomes of our lives. Paul's story actually begins on December 19, 1946, with the First Indochina War. A war that pitted a range of forces including the French and supported by the Vietnamese National Army and the Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, and the People's Army of Vietnam. A war that would encompass the entire country and the neighboring French Indochina protectorates of Laos and Cambodia. The First Indochina War lasted from 1946 to July of 1954, with the French being supported with finances and equipment from the U.S., and the Viet Minh and the People's Army of Vietnam being supported by China and Russia. The French tried in numerous ways to consolidate the Indochina area throughout the years of conflict and keep it under French rule. During this time, the 16th parallel became the dividing line, or the line in the sand as we say today. The French wanting north of the 16th parallel and the Viet Minh wanting south of the 17th parallel. And after 8 years of fighting, the Viet Minh broke the fighting spirit of the French with the overwhelming defeat of the French base at the Battle of Nha San. At the International Geneva Conference in July of 1954, the French conceded the territory north of the 17th parallel to Ho Chi Minh. The South would continue under Bao Dai with French support, but the agreement was denounced by the state of Vietnam and the United States. 1 year later, Bao Dai was ousted by his prime minister, and the Republic of Vietnam was created. Soon, an insurgency backed by the North developed against the Republic, and the conflict turned into a new war. The Vietnam War was a conflict in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia from the 1st of November 1955 to the fall of Saigon on the 30th of April 1975. It was the second of the Indochina Wars and was officially fought between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. North Vietnam was supported by the Soviet Union and China and other communist allies. South Vietnam was supported by the United States, South Korea, and the Philippines, Australia, Thailand, and other anti-communist allies. The war, considered a Cold War-era proxy war by some, lasted 19 years, with direct U.S. involvement ending in 1973, and included the Laotian Civil War and Cambodian Civil War, which ended with all three countries becoming communist in 1975. This is the beginning of Paul's story. Much like many other United States Marines, soldiers, airmen, and seamen, a story that would define the men involved for the rest of their lives. Some making this life a career, and some trying to leave it as fast and far behind them as possible. Paul's story, although it is strictly Paul's story, is much like so many others. Today we sit down with Paul and learn his story. Paul's views are just that, Paul's views. And like so many others, they will all vary to some degree.
Now we're all synced up. Paul, I want to tell you, I appreciate you coming down.
Thank you for having me.
The story that you have that, well, I've heard from about 21 years old, and I'm 58, I'm at 57 now, so I'm familiar with your story. And like I said in the intro, that you have your own story, that it's not unlike other soldiers, Marines, airmen, and seamen's stories, but each one of those stories is individual to that one person. And I have just always found your story, from the times dating back before the Marine Corps to today, to be so interesting and characteristic of the Paul that I know. So why don't you carry the viewers through where you were born?
I was born in Aiken, South Carolina on September 23rd, 1948 at Aiken County Hospital.
And how long did you grow up in Aiken?
I guess until I was about 6. And my parents divorced. Mother moved to Miami, Florida. She went to school to get on with the airlines, and she got on with National Airlines. During that time, it was about a year, I stayed with my grandparents in Augusta and went to first grade there, as a matter of fact. And then once Mother got on with National and was able to, get us a place to stay and all that, my Aunt Jan and I rode a train, the Silver Meteor, from Savannah down to Miami. And we moved into a place, and Jan stayed with us there for about a year. And from there, I went to first grade at Flagler Elementary School. And then I guess we stayed there probably about a year or so. And we moved to Coral Gables to an apartment. And at that time, the reason we moved, Jan and Bob got married, my uncle, they live here in Noonan. And they got married, so we all moved into the same apartment building in Coral Gables. And from there, I went to second grade at Coral Gables Elementary. And it was like we moved all the time, it seemed like, but it really didn't. So from there, we moved to an apartment just outside of Coral Gables in Miami. And I went to Auburndale Elementary for the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. And then for 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, which is junior high in Florida, I went to, the school name evades me right now, but anyway, it was an old Spanish-style 3-story building. I mean, it was beautiful. And so I went there for 3 years. And I was scheduled and wanted to go to Miami High, which was Miami High Stingrays. They had a great football program. But at the end of that ninth grade year, we moved to South Miami. And that threw me into another school district for Coral Gables Senior High. And the reason I wanted to go to Miami High, I started playing football when I was 7. I started at Southwest Boys Club. I started out at 90 pound and under. And I played football there every year. And so I was friends with all those guys. Well, when I moved, they all went to Miami High and I went to Coral Gables and made new friends. But for people that don't know, Miami is a big football town as far as high schools go. And I was fortunate enough to play in 1965. Well, that's incorrect. 1963, they started the first state championship in the state of Florida for different A levels, 1A, 2A, and all that. And so we won the first state championship for the state of Florida. So in 1964, we come around and we're undefeated again. We win the next state championship for Florida, but we also won the national championship through the Minnesota Sporting News magazine. And we had our big banquet at the Gables, and Ara Porcedan, who was coach at Notre Dame, they were the national champs that year. So he came down to our school and presented us with gold footballs and other memorabilia type stuff. And I didn't start as a junior, but I played a lot of time behind the guy that did start. And then as a senior, we had won, I think, 25 or 27 games in a row. We were ranked #1 in the nation. We were into our 7th game of the season, going to play Miami High, the Stingrays, and they happened to be ranked #2 in the nation. Well, the Dolphins had just come into existence and they had sparse crowds. Well, for that game against Miami High, we had 45,000 people in the Orange Bowl.
Oh, wow.
It was broadcast over the TV and on the radio. And unfortunately, we ended up losing the game 14-7. Miami High went on to be the national champs for that year. And so I had wanted to go play ball. I wanted to go to Miami, but I didn't want to be near home. Times at that time were home. My mother had remarried in 1963, and the home life was less than amiable. And so I decided, well, I didn't want to go to Miami, but I did want to be a Gator. So I was recruited by 13 different schools. But things got really bad my senior year in the home life. I was in and out. Never seemed like nothing could ever go right. And so I ended up losing a scholarship to Florida because my grades had fallen down below the level. So I hung around Miami for about a year doing nothing. I had planned on going to junior college, and I went a little bit and just lost interest. And so came down. I had done some stupid things and got into some trouble and all that. And I said, well, I got enough sense to know I got to help myself. So I went down and joined the Marines on August the 7th, 1967. On August the 14th of 67, I shipped out to Parris Island. We left Miami at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Greyhound bus. And it was me and 4 other guys from Miami. And we stopped at every little podunk in the state of Miami. I didn't know they had that many little towns.
Yeah.
And we got to Savannah. It was about 10 o'clock that night. And then we boarded a bus from Savannah that was going to take us to Parris Island and go on its way up through Charleston. So we met some more guys there. I guess there was about 10 of us that got on that bus with, civilian passengers. And so at that time, the bus drove up to the gate. There was a different gate back then. And a Marine drill instructor got on that bus and he said, are there any Marine recruits on this bus? And we raised our hand and he said, get off my frickin' bus and get off my bus now. So we shot off that bus. And so we were there at the gate and some guys had hamburgers and pogey bait, candy and all that stuff. Well, they took all that away and they began PTing us there. And I thought, oh man, what have I got myself into?
You hadn't even actually gotten onto the
hadn't
island.
gotten on the island yet. So about 12:30, 1 o'clock, they sent out the green bus and loaded us onto the bus and took us to receiving. So we processed through receiving and we went to bed about 4 o'clock, and at 5 o'clock they got us up. I found out later that that's the plan all along, to get you in there, you're tired, to get you up and commence on the havoc and all that kind of stuff. And so we processed into receiving right then and there. And so we had drill instructors the next day that picked us up, and we got shots and went and got haircuts. The haircut was all the same.
Oh yeah,
bald headed. We come out of there. They sent us to dental and sent us to all this other stuff, and we got our thing, and we spent the next day at receiving. And then the third day, they checked us out and made sure everything was fine. And people talk about the yellow footprints. Well, there really are yellow footprints at Parris Island that you get on.
Oh yeah.
So we were in there, and we're standing by these little places that's, you got your sea bag and your clothes. And the first thing they did was give you a little old box, and you took off your civilian clothes, packed them in a box, and addressed them to go anywhere they needed to go. And so we're standing there now wearing all of our utility uniform. And
let me ask you this. What address did you put on the box?
I put my mother's address in Miami.
Did you?
Yeah, and so I sent the clothes down to her. And as a matter of fact, when I joined the Marine Corps, terms were bad. I mean, they weren't good, but they weren't disastrous, but they were close to it. So when I joined in, I called Mother and told her that I had joined the Marines, and she got all upset and all that stuff. And she said, you're going to Vietnam? I said, that's why I joined. I want to go check it out and see what it's like. So anyway, now we're at Parris Island at receiving, and this guy walked in, didn't know who he was, and two other guys walked in. Man, they looked like poster Marines, had their drill instructor hats on, and they were decked out, walked firm. And the guy got up and he says, my name is Staff Sergeant Jones. I'm your senior drill instructor. From this point on, I'm your mother, your father, your girlfriend, your aunt, your uncle, I'm it. And he said, when I call your name, you answer up, grab your sea bag, walk slowly to that door, and there'll be a guy waiting to tell you where to go. So by the time he got to the third or fourth thing, that guy that hit the door, all hell broke loose. Man, they were screaming and yelling going on, people everywhere. We're standing in there, we're kind of all thunder, man, what is all that, that's going on out there? And they did it in alphabetical order, so I finally got called and went out there. Man, when I got out there was about 15 drill instructors. And you'd walk out that door and they got right in your face. And I mean, nothing from that point on was ever right. They hollered and screamed and got us on the yellow footprints, and they finally got us all out there. And I had been assigned to 1st Battalion Charlie Company. And so they got us all straightened up and, told us to face left and all that, and pick up your sea bags. So we picked up our sea bags, and we had to go about, maybe 250 yards to the barracks. And since we were brand new, there were 3-story barracks, the old wooden barracks from pre-World War II. And, I'm sorry, they were 2-story barracks. Later on, there were 3. But anyway, we got in this barracks. It was hot. Man, it was about 100 or more. And we got in this barracks. Well, by the time we got there, we were strung out about 100 yards. Guys were so weak from, they couldn't carry the sea bags and all that. And we got outside that barracks, and I thought, man, what have I done? And so they come in there, and the squad bay went left and right, and the quarterdeck was right in the middle. And so they got in there, and we got down by the bunks, and they come down there berating us. But when we come in, we climbed the outside stairs to get into the barracks. And when we got up there, them same drill instructors had skedoodled over there. And when we come through that door, it was worse than pickup was. They were all in our face, pushing us, moving us, putting us here, putting us there. And I said to myself, Lord, I don't know about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of settled down for the night, and we got into a routine. And the next day, the senior drill instructor come in there and talked for something, and he picked out, he asked something about anybody have any college education or something, and I had a little bit. So he said, you're going to be my scribe. Well, I had no idea in the world what a scribe was. And then he picked two more guys, and they were going to be the house mice. And they helped put all the drill instructor stuff out every day and all that. And what I did, I would write out the fire watch roster every night, but I'd also, on the 3x5 index cards, I would write out the next day's training schedule for the time and where and all that mess.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I was able to work that into a little advantage because I never had time to take a shower doing that. So they allowed me to take a shower later, you know, when it was called. Well, yeah, I'm sitting there thinking about this, man. You talk about an adventure now. So it got time to get in the racks that first night. And I thought, you know, well, we'll just get to bed and go to sleep. No, that wasn't the way it worked. They had you sounding off, yes, sir, no, sir, screaming to the top of your lungs. And then they'd say, ready mount. When they would say ready mount, you would slap down on, if you were top bunk, the top bunk, and bottom bunk, the bottom bunk, and you'd slap down and say, oorah. And you jump up in the bunk. Well, we did that about 15 times before they finally got us in there. And when you got up in the bunk, in whatever position you were at, you stayed there. You might stay there 10 seconds, you might stay there 2 minutes. And then they would say adjust. When they said adjust, then you could get yourself comfortable in your bunk. Mm-hmm. And so that was pretty much how my arrival in the first day went at Parris Island.
Okay. We'll get to it later, but that's not your only time at Parris Island.
No, that's not my only time at Parris Island. No.
So you've had your first day in basic training at Parris Island. How did your career progress from there?
So we graduated from Parris Island on that Friday, and then Saturday we were all packed up, and they brought these green Marine Corps buses out there, and they had you know, the yellow writing on the side said United States Marine Corps. Well, they had told us the night before that we had to pay for that ride to pay for the bus transportation. So as each one of us got on that bus, we paid the drill instructor $10. And I think there was 96 of us, or 90 something, that graduated. So anyway, we didn't figure that out till we were about 3/4 of the way to Camp Lejeune on that bus, and we all laughed about it. So we went to Camp Lejeune. We actually went to Camp Geiger for infantry training regiment, where everybody went there, regardless of what your MOS was after that. Mm-hmm. And we went through a month of field training and learned a lot, you know, fired every kind of weapon the Marine Corps had back then. So we had a good time. Being a Miami boy, I'm a city boy. I never had slept in a sleeping bag before. So it got colder than the dickens out there. And while we were in the field for 3 days, it snowed. Well, man, I climbed in that sleeping bag the first night. I stayed fully dressed. I like to froze to death. So the next day we got up and packed up and moved and did all the stuff we got. And then that night, and I said, man, I like to froze to death last night. And they said, well, did you take your clothes off? I said, no, man, I slept fully dressed. And they said, well, you're supposed to take your clothes off. Well, I didn't do that either. I just froze because I was afraid they were going to come by in the middle of the night and tell us to get up, pack up, and move. Mm-hmm. But then it got okay. So after going through Geiger, and from there, we all split. We went home for 10 days leave. Well, I wanted to be a recon Marine. And growing up, that's what I'd always wanted to be. So I tried out for recon. There was probably 20 of us at the most. I passed everything, the runs, the pull-ups, all that kind of stuff you had to do. But I couldn't pass the eye chart. I wore glasses, and they told me to take my glasses off, and I could barely see the wall. So they failed me from recon. Well, I was aggravated about that because, you know, the way it went. But anyway, I went home on leave for 10 days, and I had Christmas with my mom and my stepdad. Then I flew out to Pendleton and went to training out there at what they call Las Pulgas. It was called the training battalion. Mm-hmm. And it was up in the mountains, and it was cold. We were now in December. I got there December 27th, and it was colder than Dickens. I didn't know what a Quonset hut was till I got there. We had Quonset hut with an old coal burning heater in there that didn't work, but it didn't make no difference.
Yeah.
We were in the field.
Be careful of the mic with your hands.
Oh, thank you. we were in the field almost all the time. We'd go out early in the morning at dark and hump those mountains up and down and across, and come back in and get in about 2 or 3 o'clock and back up in the morning at 5 and out again. We were humping the mountains we didn't realize at the time, of course, you know, it's like the service, they don't tell you nothing.
Right.
But it was to get us in shape for Vietnam. But they had set up a Viet Cong, well, a typical Vietnamese village, mm-hmm. but they set it up like it was occupied by the Viet Cong. And they had booby traps in there and all kinds of stuff, really authentic. And they had Marines dressed up in black pajamas and all that, you know, playing the enemy. And, you know, you kind of halfway pay attention to it. And we were going down one trail, and I tripped a booby trap. It was a bamboo pole that was open, and when I tripped the booby trap, that bamboo pole come across and hit me right across my shins and put me down.
Woke you up, didn't it?
It did, boy. And from that point on, I paid attention to everything. And so we went through that. Well, the weekend before we shipped out, my mom came out and brought my grandparents. My grandparents had never flown, so mother flew them out. We spent the weekend together all around San Diego, and I took a buddy of mine with us, Bob Cloninger from North Carolina. We had a good time. And so they left the next day, and we went on back, and they turned us loose for a day. And all they could say is, you're not allowed to go to Tijuana, Mexico. You're not allowed to go to Tijuana, Mexico. Well, being young kids, we thought, we're going to Tijuana, Mexico. So we got to the bus station, me and 3 or 4 guys I went around with, and there must have been 200 Marines down there. We all went down there, and I saw things I had never in my wildest imagination thought about. So we got back that night. They had about 100 payphones set up in this area where you could call home before you shipped out. And I called Mother and woke her up and told her, I said, man, I've been to Tijuana, Mexico. I've seen things I ain't never thought about. And she kind of giggled and she said, why are you calling? I said, well, we're shipping out in the morning at 0600. We're headed to El Toro, and we're going to fly from El Toro to Vietnam. We flew a 707, flew to Hawaii and landed in Hawaii and refueled. Flew from there to Guam. We got off. They let us off the plane in Hawaii while they refueled. We flew to Guam, and they wouldn't let us off the plane, so we stayed on the plane. And then we flew straight on to Okinawa. And we got to Okinawa, and I was interested in that, was hoping I could see something, you know, because I knew about the Battle of Okinawa from boot camp. But we hung around there, I think, for 3 or 4 days, and what we did was they made sure we had all of our utilities and stuff, and we packed up all the other gear that we wouldn't need except utilities and boots. Mm-hmm. And they put it in storage for us. And so the next morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, we flew to Da Nang. And, you know, we were all kind of apprehensive, but at the same time, we were all kind of excited. You know, this is what we joined the Marines for. This is what we want to see and get. Well, it didn't start out too good. Now, here it is dark, and we start down the ramps, and there's Vietnamese all over. Well, the only thing they ever told us about Vietnamese is going through boot camp, we used to chant, kill VC, kill VC. I mean, they were putting it in your mind. Mm-hmm. And they all had on black pajamas, or the women had on white, well, I call them pajamas, but they were their dress, you know. And as we're getting off the plane, one of the guys that had already done a tour there hollered out, "We're being overrun." Man, we panicked. We went everywhere. We didn't have any weapons or nothing. It took them about an hour to get us all back together. So we load these cattle cars, and you know, cattle cars, there's no seats in it. You stand up and hold on and off you go.
Right.
And so as we're going around for the far east side of the base, going around to the marine side, we headed out, and in the distance, there was a lot of lights, but you could see the lights coming off of something that looked aluminum or stainless. You know, it reflected real bright. And one of the guys said, "Well, that's where half of y'all are going to end up at. Look at the guy on the left and the guy on the right, and you'll be left." Well, we could see it. It was Gray's registration, and it was nothing but caskets, thousands of caskets. I thought, So we went on around, got to the marine side of the bus and base, and got off the bus and went in, and they processed us. And I was picked with several other guys, was assigned to 1st Tank Battalion. Now I got there, it was January 16th, 1968. So they took us down about 3 or 4 miles south of the air base, and which is probably 7 or 8 miles south of Da Nang downtown, and checked into 1st Tanks Battalion. And we were the first grunts to be assigned there, but we didn't have any idea of, you know, you go, you go. Well, as it turned out, Tet started on the night of January 29th, and it was all over Vietnam. And 1st Tanks Battalion was deployed to Way City because of the battle going on. But they kept us there. And now we had never run a patrol or done anything. You know, we had run them in playtime, more or less. We had that first patrol, they told us to go. I was a Lance Corporal, I was senior. I'd been in the Marine Corps, 5 months. So we go out on this patrol, and we went down to what they call POL, Petroleum Oil and Lubricants, and went down past there because they did that's where they kept all the fuel and stuff.
Right.
And went out, made a pass down there like that. And so we came back in. We weren't gone but about an hour or so, I reckon. But the next day, they come in there and asked for one volunteer to go to an outpost. I put my hand up, but you know, they always tell you don't volunteer for anything.
Right.
But you know, I wanted to see what was going on. I mean, that's why I went in there. So I was sent out to what they called OP Panther, Hill 10, I think it was, anyway. And it was out of the way. It was a couple of miles southeast of where the 1st Tanks was on a hill out there. And what it was an outpost to, you know, see if you could see enemy, but it was mainly for rocket attacks. And they had different outposts out there. So, and they had a map laid out and had it oriented right. So if you saw rockets launched at night, you would shoot an azimuth to it and then estimate the distance. And they'd take all that together and triangulate it and find out and shoot artillery or put Hueys in there or something. And so it was just me.
Warheads on foreheads.
Yes,
so
sir. And so it was just me and another guy during the day, and I kind of liked that. You know, I thought, hey, man, you know, this life of leisure right here, brother. And that first month, February 1st, I got promoted to Lance Corporal. And so we stayed there a while, and there was a large infiltration of Viet Cong that a track coming into, they came in from the south to hit the Da Nang Air Base. Well, you know, the Marines are up at Khe Sanh, they're up at Dong Ha, all up through those areas. And the Way City was the really big battle. And so we stayed there and pretty much kind of bypassed everything. You know, we had our moments of stuff of getting hit, but at night they would bring out the other grunts that were back at the thing, and they'd stay on the hill. And so eventually with Tet, they all stayed there day and night, and we had 2 tanks come out every night. And one of them had a pink panther on the side of it and had a rebel flag flying. I didn't pay much attention to it then, but I always remember that. Well, come May, the Charlie had blown up the bridge on Highway 1 going south going out towards Hill 10, 41, 55, and went on down to Saigon. They had blown that bridge up. So they brought the Seabees in and were going to rebuild the bridge, but they put in a temporary pontoon bridge. So they sent us over to that bridge. And we had fun there all the time. So we were always getting hit by the VC. You know, they'd come in several times. They'd try to, you know, overrun the bridge, but they were never successful. And there was kids everywhere. We had a security on each side of the bridge, and the reason we did that was obvious, but it was also to control the traffic. We had traffic that would go south, traffic that would come north, so we controlled the traffic. And we'd let one convoy go one way and then let the other one go the other way. And there was kids out there, and young kids. I'm talking about 5, 6 year olds up to teenagers. And we made friends with them, and they would always try to sell us Coke and beer and all that kind of mess, you know. And
let me ask you this. Speaking of the locals and the kids and everything, we found through deployments over into the Middle East that the locals always tend to know what was going on, even if you didn't.
Always.
And if one that you did business with every day or saw every day, and you'd become friendly with them, if they said, "Have a good day," you knew everything was going to be good that day. Or if they said, "Have a safe day," then you knew, you knew things were going to go a little sideways that day. And so they were kind of giving you a heads up. Did you have any instances like that where?
No, we never did have anybody come up and give us any kind of indication of what was going to go on. But they were sweet kids. I think I still got some pictures of some of them. But one of them, this little kid, he wore a little hat and had sunglasses and had a white shirt and some black shorts, and he was probably 12, maybe 13. And the little area that we were in was always open because the gates were open, and they'd come in and wander around. We got hit there was a village on the north side of the bridge on both sides of the road, and there was a village on the south side that was on the south side of the road. And so we'd get hit a lot from there, but one night we got hit really hammered. I mean, we got hammered, and they were shooting out of the villages. We were, we went back, man. We opened up with M60s, and the tanks opened up and everything else. Well, the next morning, we found this little rascal in the wire dead. He had been in and was marking the positions. Mm-hmm. And come to find out, his brother was a VC chief, whatever you want to call him, and he was dead in the wire. So he had been marking everything for them to hit. And so after that, we kind of closed things down a little bit. But John Bannon, we had become really good friends in ITR, and he and I were up in a 50-foot tower with 2 M60s in there one night. We always changed it around, and we were up talking, and I was looking at that village, and I kept seeing things move, or I thought I did, and I kept watching. And I told John, I said, "Look over there, see what you see." He said, "Well, there's people moving." Our whole time in the Marine Corps, they had told us, "Look, Charlie wears black." They didn't say nothing about everybody wearing black. They said Charlie wears black. So we watched them. There was 12 or 14 of them, and the 60s were loaded, so we moved ahead of them a little bit. And when they started to get into the open, we opened up. We killed about 8 of them. Well, the next morning, we got the biggest ass chewing you ever seen. They come out there and ask us why we did. And we said, well, they were VC. And they said they were popular forces in the village. We said, well, they had black on. They said, well, not everybody wearing black. Mm-hmm. So, it was a learning lesson. Mm-hmm. But so what we did from there, if we saw you carrying a weapon,
Right.
or any explosive in it, then you were fair game. We learned that from then on out. And so Tet, excuse me, Tet was really cooking. Well, it was so bad they had brought the 27th Marines over from Pendleton, and they were all cooks, supply people, office people. All the grunts had done been gone. Well, they shipped them to south of Da Nang you had Marble Mountain, which was a big Marine helicopter base, okay? And then you had China Beach was a real beach. Mm-hmm. It was the R&R beach. It was beautiful. The sand there looked like it was just pure white and fine. It was beautiful. Palm trees and all that. Well, anyway, they put them over in that area, but they didn't have anybody with any experience. And of course, you know, your time in Vietnam, you better pay attention. You better learn how to read a map and call in artillery and air and all that kind of stuff. So they sent us over there. Well, that area, was called Tactical Area of Responsibility, and that area for them was probably 50 square miles, I would say. It come from the South China Sea to about 5 miles inland. And the first mile and a half or so was this beautiful white sand with palm trees and all that. And then it played back into, you know, the regular thing. And that area, every time, well, we went over there and got in, and I was a little lance corporal. So at first they gave me the company radio, and I did that for a little bit. And I wasn't real happy with it, but anyway, you do what you're told to do. And then I came back and was into a squad. Then I was made a squad leader. Well, every time we would go into that area, you're guaranteed to lose one man. Most of the time they'd lose a foot or a leg, or it might kill them or whatever for that, because it was real sandy and you didn't have any way of knowing. And at night, you can't see squad anyway. So we learned to do our best to stay in line and step where the guy in front of you stepped. Mm-hmm. And it got to be summertime, and it'd get up to 120, 125 degrees. And of course, jungle boots had that metal plate in the bottom, and that sand your feet would get burnt. And I don't know if it really burnt, but they were toasted. And so we were always losing people. So I decided on one of the patrols that I'd done had enough. So I went over and grabbed me I think that the first one I grabbed was an old man, and I said, "Hey, look, Pop," he didn't understand any English, but he could understand what I thought. I said, "We're going to go from here, we're going to go from there, and you're going to lead us." So told the rest of the squad, you know, in typical Marine formation, you got the point man, and you got a backup man, then you got the squad leader, and then radio man and so forth. So I told them, "Hey, we're going to head out, and we're all going to step where that old man steps," because they knew they would mark the booby traps where the villagers knew where they were. So that caught on to everybody else, and everybody else started doing that. And of course, our losses during the daytime pretty much went to nil unless we were ambushed. But at night, you're still open for game. So we stayed over there in that area till August the 1st, and they recalled the 27th Marines back to Pendleton. So at that time, we were attached to the 7th Marines. We had originally been attached to 7th Marines, but had been given to the 1st Tank Battalion. And then 7th Marines transferred us over to the 27th. Well, now we're back to the 7th Marines. And they had a huge operating area we were at the rocket belt, and then we went several thousand meters out from there and back into the Kusan Mountains. Mm-hmm. And the idea was there was tanglefoot all out at the edge of the rocket belt. And we did that so that Charlie had to get inside that to be able to hit the air base. And of course, you can't be everywhere every time, you know, but the air base would get hit quite a bit. And so I got promoted to corporal in August and got back to Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. And we were on Hill 10 then, which come by the Kusan River running in. and we operated out of there. And it was an area we called Happy Valley and Razorback Ridge. And then it was thick forest and vegetation out there. And Charlie lived back in there. You could go out there with a company. You better go out with a battalion, but you were always outdone 30, 40, 50 to 1. So we didn't make a whole lot of trips out into there. And so we patrolled all that area. And we ended up, go from Hill 10 to Hill 41 and outposts and all that mess. And spent most of our time out there. And had quite a bit of contact out there. There was a Green Beret base out on that river. And from Hill 41, they were probably 3,000 to 4,000 meters from where we were. And we'd kind of run patrols out in that area along the river to try to help them out, And so we were out one night on an ambush and couldn't find any. Well, we did our patrol route and got our ambush site set in, and it was raining. Done started monsoon season. Wet, rained just as hard as it could rain for 3 months, and it was.
Water would raise in the rivers and creeks there.
Oh, yeah.
10, 15 feet when that would happen, wouldn't it?
And when all that started, you had to stay on the paddy dikes and hope you found the paddy dike going through, because the water would be up to your chest, And the good thing about that was no matter how tight you had your uniform locked down, you got back, you covered in leeches. And so we run a lot of patrols in there. But one night, to find some high ground, I set us up on the edge of a ridge. Wasn't any real cover, but I thought we were pretty safe there. And that Green Beret base got hammered. So we moved in that direction trying to catch Charlie as he come back up the river, but we never did see anybody. And that village right there, the next morning, we swept that village, just 14 of us. We had a rifleman, we had an M60, and had a corpsman. We swept that village and didn't look like it had never been hit. And so the battalion commander wasn't satisfied. He called all the battalion out and we swept that village, still didn't find nothing. Because, they were great about spider holes and tunnels and all that kind of stuff. And so that went on quite a lot. And we got sent, after Hill 41, we got moved to what they call Cobb Bridge. Cobb had been a lieutenant in the Marine Corps. He got killed over there and had won the Medal of Honor, so they named that bridge after him. Well, that river that run under there was probably 15 feet. The banks were probably up 15 feet from the river. Well, in monsoon season, they were up at the edge of the bank and right up underneath the bridge. And that water roared through there like, it was wide open. And
I think I've got a picture of that.
If you got a tank on there being pulled across, probably.
Yeah.
And we stayed there, and a friend of mine today, Dan Fennessy, Pat's met him. He disappeared. I was a platoon sergeant then, had my platoon there, but I was only a corporal. And Dan disappeared one day. Well, we spazzed out. We didn't know. It was a major intersection there. And the Vietnamese would come by riding their bicycles, or they had these little three-wheelers that would normally hold about 6 people, but they'd have 15 people, and they'd be on the top holding on to the sides, We didn't know what had happened to him. Well, he showed up late that afternoon, and boy, I crawled all over him. I was mad. And so I sent him to fill in sandbags the next day by himself in the heat. And it was punishment. It's what he should have got. And he reminded us of that in Charleston in 2000, a reunion. We had a Marine reunion up there, and he drove all the night long down from Indianapolis with his wife, Susan. We're standing outside going to take a tour bus to Parris Island and tour, but he got out of that truck, and he's hollering, "Where's Joe Brewer? Where's Joe Brewer?" Because everybody knew me as Joe back then. And Pat said, "There's somebody calling your name. You going to answer?" And I said, "No, I ain't going to answer. I don't know what that fool might want." Because I didn't know who it was. They come over, it was Dan, and we had a good time. But anyway, so we moved from different hills all around, kept on patrolling, run day patrols, run night patrols. You run your patrol from 7 to 7. And then if you ran your patrol during the daytime, at nighttime, you had security on whatever hill you were on, around the base. And so we ended up moving from there finally, and we went out on, I can't remember the operation. It might have been the prelude to Meade River. But we all flew to this, never have been sure where this camp was that we went to. But there was probably 900 to 1,000 Marines at that camp. So we knew something was going on.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I probably am. Meade River. That was towards the end of the war, wasn't it?
No, that started in November of 68, and it ended on December the 10th of 68.
Okay.
So we had run a lot of operations in there. We'd run Allenbrook, and that was out at a place called Gorno Island. Mm-hmm. And it was an R&R place for Charlie. And so we went out there through Allenbrook, and it was in the heat of the summer. Now I'm talking about hot now. And there was a lot going on. And we even found an underground hospital where they had treated patients, and they must have known we were coming because it was empty, but you could see where they had this hospital in there and had beds in there and all that stuff for the people. So we blew it up. And but anyway, so we run out in all those areas. Well, for that operation, I don't remember what it was, but anyway, excuse me, we made this huge circle around the area full of U.S. Marines and South Vietnamese Marines and some ARVN, the Army Republic of Vietnam, and they were a waste. But anyway, every day this circle would close down. Well, that night, about midnight, we walked out to go down to where we were supposed to be. We got there 3 or 4 in the morning. Pretty good hike. We set up on the road, and we were going to push about 150, 200 meters to the river. Mm-hmm. Well, it took us all day to push that 200 meters to the river. We were in a huge firefight. And during that firefight, as we're moving forward, I saw something to my left front get up and run. And when it did, I went over there and I shot, and they went down. And so when we finally got in that afternoon, settled on the river, we went to looking. It was a young teenage girl that I had shot. She had a rifle, and so, that's the way it was. Mm-hmm. And so we sat in along that river, and we stayed there about 2 days. And the thing about that, we had a company commander named James Foster. He was a captain. Couldn't stand the guy. He was a drunk. So we're along that river that night, and it had a natural trench line along this river. So we sat in that trench line. And so it was Ben Swerrell. He was the platoon commander. He was a lieutenant. And there was Bob Chug. He was radio man. And it was me and a corpsman named Marks. And so, we're spread out about over 10, 15 meters along this trench line. And so that night, I got my poncho liner laid out. I got my pack laid out. I got my 16 loaded with 2 magazines, taped together. And Marks is laying right there too. And we're talking to Ben and Bob down there in the thing. And all of a sudden, we hear a bunch of 105s traveling. You get to learn the difference between the AK-47 and the M16, a 105, 155 and all that. We heard them things shoot, and I made the comment to Ben. I said, somebody's fixing to catch hell. It wasn't but about 3 seconds. I heard them whistling, and I knew they were on top of us. And so I hollered roll, and I stayed low, but I rolled towards the trench line. And the explosion, of course, it's nighttime, didn't know how close it was, but that explosion knocked me into the trench. and I had no feeling in my back or my legs. But when I fell, I was laid back looking up, my head against the trench. Now this is kind of grotesque, but it's the truth. And I was laying there and I looked up and I could see Mark's laying there and I could see his face. And I reached up and I pulled him, and when I did, his brains fell all over me. It cut the top of his head off. And so, man, I spazzed. I couldn't feel nothing. I'm covered up. He's laying there next to me dead. And I finally, after about 20 minutes, got some feeling back where I could move a little bit. And Ben turned me over and was checking me out, and we didn't find any blood. The concussion was what got me. Mm-hmm. And so the next morning we got up, and about 3 feet from the edge of the trench line to where my poncho liner was, that thing landed. Blew my pack smithereens, destroyed my M16, and it killed Mark's. And we got up and looked, and all we could assumed that Mark's, he had only been in country about 2 weeks, that he had got up on his knees and his hands and was trying to crawl to the hole, and the shrapnel killed him. Well, come to find out, Foster had called in the wrong coordinates for the artillery fire for us. And it was indirect fire, just searching out where you thought somebody might be. Well, the idiot, he gave our coordinates as the fire coordinates, and he reversed the coordinates where he wanted to be. He gave us our position, so they zeroed in on all of us over there. Well, as we're laying there, Ben's on the radio, snatched it out of Chug's hands, and he's hollering, check fire, and I'm screaming, check fire, you know, and it was over. 10 seconds, it was all over, and the damage was done. And so the next day, they decided to pull us out. So we humped back to Hill 55. We humped about 6 clicks, which is 6,000 meters, mm-hmm. and went up and ended up on Hill 55. And the noose tightened and tightened and tightened. So we went up there for several days to get ourselves fixed up and repacked and, you know, draw some more chow and all that. And we flew out. And this thing had started on, there's a picture, I don't know if you got a picture of it, but it shows me checking gear. For the guys later, I'd sent them to chow and I was checking the gear. And so they helicoptered, put us on 46s and sent us back out, and we set back in the lines. Of course, it had moved and moved. Things are getting closer. Things are getting worse day by day. So Thanksgiving Day rolls around, and it had been raining. It's still monsoon. And so we set in along another part of the river, which was probably 10 or 12 feet up from the river, but it was kind of subsided because monsoon was easing off. So we're set up in there, and John Banner and I dug us a hole about, 2.5, 3 feet wide and about 4 or 5 feet long and about 4 feet deep, you know. And so it had rained so much that the hole was full of water. And it was still running off. Well, it was so wet and the water was so high, the only way you could sleep, we tied off our rubber ladies. You know, I guess they call them, what they call them, rafts, or mm-hmm. personal raft. We tied them off to a tree. And so when you slept, you got on that rubber lady to sleep. But, I mean, you know, you're soaking wet, you're still in the water, but, you know, it's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And so Thanksgiving morning rolls around, and I get a call on the radio, and Ben got a call. They were sending birds in for Thanksgiving. They were going to set up a Thanksgiving lunch for us all, fly in hot food for mm-hmm. us. We thought, man, that's great. So Ben called and said, get the guys lined up. We'll run them through the chow line. They can go back and eat. So I get all the guys from the platoon up, and we get over there, and we're standing in line, and they got all this nice warm food set up, with tea and coffee, and they had beer and all that stuff, and the beer was hot.
Mm-hmm.
And about that time that we go through the line, the radio come back on, and we're told to don't worry about lunch, go back and get your gear. Charlie Company's got hammered. They got a lot of wounded and dead, and they were in an area that had railroad tracks, back in the French days. And every time we go into that area, we would get hit. Well, everything had tightened so much. We had the NVA now. It wasn't the VC, it was the NVA. And, buddy, they were like us. They weren't going nowhere. Mm-hmm. So they were caught in a crossfire. So we went back and rolled up our ponchos, packed all our gear, and went over there in line, and we're standing back in line. And I looked over at Ben, and I said, we need some chow. He said, well, get them. So I told the guys, get your canteen cups out, get your helmets out, take your helmet liner out, use your helmet, we'll go through that line and get everything thrown in there. So we went down this line and got our chow all in our helmets.
Yeah.
And so when we got on the 46s, we ate, which was, normally we wouldn't do that. Normally when you got on one of the 46s, you'd sit on your helmet. You'd do that because Charlie's shooting up at the helicopter.
Right.
And so it was an uneventful trip. We flew in over there and landed, and we went into where Charlie Company had left all their gear and manned that lines, and then we sent support over there to try to hammer them. And so that day went along pretty good, and they were getting waxed. And so it eventually, it wore out. The NBA broke contact, which they would do, and the numbers got equal or better, they would just pull out. And so we took that place. Well, Meade River ended. I had been hit with shrapnel and had been medevaced out right when the switch changed. I was hitting my neck. And so I was medevaced to 1st Med Battalion on the Bird. There was me and another guy, and there was another guy on there. And that guy didn't have any head. So when we landed at 1st Med Battalion, and the nurses and everybody come running on, and I was bleeding like a stuffed pig, they run on, they said he's dying. That's all I remember hearing. And I all I can think of is that I was thinking it was me, Mm-hmm. The next thing I remember is waking up in the ward and had IV in me, and I was getting shots and everything else too. And I looked over to my left, there was a TV on, and I thought to myself, well, if there's TV on, I'm not in heaven.
Yeah.
I'm still here. And I looked down the ward, and it was packed with Marines. I looked up again, and there was Hee Haw, and there was Glenn Campbell singing Lyman of the County. And
Okay.
I think to myself, So I looked over to the right, and man, this guy had 3 or 4 IVs in him, all kinds of things. Man, he was hooked up. And I said, what happened to you? And he said, I had appendicitis. So he was sitting there like that. And I had IV in, mm-hmm. and they were feeding antibiotics as high as they could feed them. And so I was in there about 3 days, and I decided I could hear the club playing music back there. I thought to myself, man, I'm here. I'm going to that club. And so one night when the charge nurse got through doing what she was doing and went off somewhere, I hobbled over, had my little bottle of
IV bottle,
hobbled over, there was a pair of crutches. So I got the crutches, and because I'd been hitting this leg too. And so I hobbled over to the club. I didn't have anything to drink. I stayed there about 30 minutes, just listening to the music. It was nice just to get your mind away. So I hobbled back into the hut, the ward, got over to the desk, because the desk was right in front of where I was. I put the, what do you call them, crutches back up. I hobbled over to the bed and went to sit down, and I sat down on somebody. And buddy, she went to cussing me out. She went to threatening me. I had never heard such language. Man, she was wore out on me. Got into me about getting up and hobbling over there and doing this and doing that. Told me, she said, your ass better not get out of this bed again, boy. And I
Was
like,
that the charge nurse?
That was the charge nurse. I said she was a equivalent to a major in the Navy. I don't really know what that was, but I was, yes ma'am, no ma'am, you know, man, I went in there. So a couple more days, I was in there for, I think 10 days. A couple more days rocked by, you know, and the corpsmen come down through the ward and give you shots.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was about 3 guys up to my left across, because there was bunks on, or beds on both sides. They weren't bunks. He gave a guy a shot, and I don't know what happened, but the guy had a reaction to the shot or how it was guided or whatever, and the guy went to like a fit. So the RNs come running in there and, you know, got him all settled down, got him fixed, whatever they did. So this cat keeps coming down, and he gets over to me, and he says, you know, it's time for your shot. And I said, you ain't giving me no shot. I said, I saw what you did to that cat. I don't know what you did, but you're not giving me a shot. And he said, I'm going to give you a shot. And I said, no, you're going to pick your ass up off this floor if you think you're going to give me a shot. So one of the nurses come down there, and she asked me what was wrong, and I told her. I said, he ain't giving me a shot. And so she gave me the shot, and it kind of spread down to the rest of the guys. Well, by this time, this lieutenant, he was gone with his appendicitis. They had a dog handler next to me. His dog was outside right there by him. This guy he was pretty tore up. And nobody could get near that dog except him. And he stayed a couple of days and then he left. I don't really know what happened. But one other thing that sticks in my mind, there was they had a South Korean Marine in there. And he had got burned with napalm on his back. And they had him and they tie him down. And man, I remember that first day.
They commenced to scrubbing him?
Scrubbing him. And man, he was screaming to the top of his lungs. They gave him, you know, something for it. Man, that thing, it shook all of us up. Well, eventually I got sent back to the platoon and all that stuff. And everything was fine, you know. Mead River was over. And so John Bannon, my buddy, came back one day from chow. He had met this sergeant, and they got into a conversation, and this guy was telling about coming off of Marine Embassy duty. He'd been in Rome, telling John all about this duty. Well, see, I had signed up for 2 years, so I was going to get out in August of '69. John come down there telling me about this story, and I went and talked to this guy, and man, I mean, it sounded to me like, hey, this is an opportunity for something. So I went and saw the recruiter, and I said, hey, tell me about this embassy duty thing. So he did. He said, but you don't have enough time. You have to have 3 years to complete your tour. I said, well, you know, I'll extend for that to cover that time. So I did. I extended to go to embassy school. Well, about 2 days later, after that thing went through, John, he did also. We got messages from Commandant of the Marine Corps in a text that told our leadership that we were non-deployable. That meant no more field action, no more nothing. We were on a hold. It said you're on a hold by CMC, Commandant of the Marine Corps, with orders too. So by now, that's about the first week of January of '69. And so the guys, it felt kind of bad and sad that the guys would still go out and patrol, but John and I are in the back, you know. We've turned the platoon and squads over to other guys now. And I was happy, but I wasn't happy. And so anyway, one of the days they were out, one of the squads went out and got hit real hard. And they were behind Patty Dyke. Charlie had them, you know, where they couldn't get up. They couldn't go nowhere, do nothing like that. So they sent out Ben Sorrell. He had been transferred to be a backseater in OV-10. He was going to be the controller for calling in airstrikes and all that kind of stuff. So we had a new lieutenant. I don't really know who he was. I don't know if I ever really met him. But First Sergeant came down there and he was asking, he said, we need a reaction force. And I said, well, I'll go. John said, he'll go. And Top said, you're not supposed to go. I said, I'll go. So I took out some other guys and we went out there and they let us in there. And when we got in there, buddy, they opened up again. Well, John and I were behind this patty dike, and you know, the patties are flooded with water for rice. And they got a 50 set up in there somewhere, and that thing's taking out clods of dirt from this patty dike. And by this time, you know, everybody's hunkered down, buddy. We're just got our nose out of the water so we can breathe. And so finally, air came in and they dropped HE and napalm and all that out and cleared all that out. And we went back in, and I told John, I said, that's it for me, brother. I ain't going back out. So for the next 3 weeks, we stayed in, and we got our orders to Headquarters Marine Corps. And the way it worked, all the guys that were sent over on the plane together all came home together. Mm-hmm. So Mike Dean was another buddy of mine. He was from Tampa, Florida. John was from Rome, New York. And of course, I was from Miami. And so Mike Dean rotated a day ahead of John and I. So the next day, John and I are headed from Hill 55 to Da Nang Air Base to catch our flight to Okinawa. We had a Jeep driver. None of us had any weapons. The driver had a .45. So as we're headed back towards Da Nang, we got a guy playing sniper. Thank God he didn't know how to shoot. So we got on over there and we laughed and carried on, and we caught our plane and arrived back to Okinawa and got sent back over to where you go when you're going to be sent to those barracks. And you know, you draw out your sea bag and all that stuff, and they refit your uniform. So I weighed 220 when I got to Vietnam. I weighed 169 when I got back to Okinawa. And of course, you gather. Now you're seeing all the guys that you went over with. I mean, it's like a big party because, you know, some went to 7th, some went to 9th Marines, some went to 3rd Marines, 1st Marines, you know, all that kind of stuff. So we got out at the airport. Now, we didn't know about Hare Krishna and all the peace protests and all that kind of mess, you know, people ringing the tambourines and all that crap. So we got out of the taxi and we're in dress greens, you know, looking good, serious, not up to no kind of horse manure. We got out and walked by, and this girl acted like she was going to spit on me, and I said, bitch, if you spit on me, I'm going to knock your teeth out. She didn't spit. So we went on in, but the curious thing was is as you would pass people, it was like you had a disease. For most people, not all, but most people, like there was something, you had radiation sickness or something, you know. I didn't pay no attention to it. Well, Mother still worked for National Airlines, and she was a supervisor in reservations. And she had talked to the people at San Francisco, and they held a plane up for me to catch the plane a few minutes. So I got on the plane and walked back, and people, you know, thanked me and cheered, and some did, some didn't. So I went all the way to the back and found me a seat. I just sat back there by myself in this seat, just happy as a lark, took my jacket off and just relaxed because it was a 4-hour flight to Miami. And so the captain got on. Well, we landed in Miami, and the captain got on, and he said, I'd like to ask for everybody to stay seated. He said, we got a Marine on here by the name of Joe Brewer, coming back from Vietnam. His mother works for National, and we'd like for him to get off first. So they did. They all stayed seated, you know. Nobody said a word. Well, I got out there, and Mother was out there, and my stepdad were out there, and she had made up some signs. Said one of them said, my son, a Marine grunt, is home from Vietnam, and I don't know what the other was. There was quite a crowd of people out there, and they all said hey and thanked me and patted me on the back, you know, and I was kind of surprised. We still didn't know about the protests because, you know, they didn't report none of that in Vietnam.
I've known Paul for 32 years and have always enjoyed any time that I've been able to spend with him. I've also been able to call him family. Paul and I both would like to ask that if you're a veteran and you're experiencing any difficulties, be it physical or mental, please contact the VA. You'll be glad that you did. Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please hit the subscribe button and don't forget to hit that bell so that you'll be notified whenever we do an upload. And we generally do one each and every week. Don't forget our sister channel over at K&A Ranch. And if you like those videos, please hit the subscribe button and ring that bell as well. Always remember, every trip starts with a step. And that step, well, it starts with you.